me see if we've got our first question teed up.
Yeah. So we actually have a question submitted, and everyone can continue to do so by emailing questions to me at lisa.lee@dalberg. The first question actually we've received is from James Bontempo. So I'm going to actually open up the floor to James to elaborate on his question.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
That's perfect. Thanks, James.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for allowing me to ask my question. Thank you for presenting this information today, and thank you to the mHealth Alliance for providing this opportunity for all of us to participate in this conversation. My question, I realize now, may be a little bit in the weeds, but multiple times this idea of mHealth standards has come up in this presentation and in the past. I've often struggled, however, to understand what exactly is meant by an mHealth standard. As a technologist myself, I think of some really geeky stuff like TCP/IP protocols and hypertext transfer protocols and all these other things, these other very low-level technological standards that have been developed over the last few decades that allow things like this webinar to happen. I'm not sure if you mean standards at that level, or is the idea that maybe at a much higher level that there would be standard sorts of applications, open MRS, for example, or something like this, that would be applied to meet very specific kind of health service delivery needs? Or might it be somewhere in the middle, like, we have HL7 and other standards that govern sort of how information is shared between applications? If anyone could provide some kind of clarity on what exactly is meant by an mHealth standard and what that might look like, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And I think your question's a great one, in that I think this is an area that gets discussed a lot. And two pieces to my answer. The first is when we've been talking about technology standards, it's really looking at the standards that could be used across deployments to address issues in interoperability. So that's been the overall framing here. I think to your point, though, and just getting specific on what is being, where would the focus be, the intention would be, again, in a working group, a community of practice format, to really prioritize, how can we get started in this area, perhaps taking one use case and working to align on specific standards to be adopted and deployed, and using this as a way to get started in terms of addressing issues in interoperability. So I think the agenda is still and that we would define that with folks like yourself and other members and partners in the community to get deeper into the agenda itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Are there any other questions from the line?
This is Edward, sorry, from Instead, and it's a very simple logistical question. Do you think we can get a copy of the slides afterwards? I joined like a couple of minutes late, so I was not able to see the first one.
Absolutely, and this will be posted on Hub, actually, with the discussion board, so everyone can see it there. And if there's any feedback that you'd like to share after the call, how you reflect on this a bit, we'd very much appreciate it.
So we actually got another question through email from Allison Bloch. Allison, do you mind elaborating on your question for us?
Sure, happy to. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, thanks.
Great. Thanks for conducting this webinar today. It's been very interesting. I just had a question. I don't know if you're ready to share this information, but I would be curious to hear a little bit about some of the findings from the benchmarking you've been doing about other alliances and how they've structured themselves and work with the community and their other partners, and just how that's leading some of your thinking about the structure for the alliance going forward. I don't know if there's time for that now or if this is premature, but it was something Vicki had mentioned, so I was just curious. Or if you can tell us some of the organizations that you were that you looked at when you were conducting your benchmarking. Thanks.
Absolutely. Great question, Ali. And we are still, benchmarking is underway. I can share some of the early learning reflections. And we've been looking at a number of different organizations that are involved in what we've characterized as sector building, and ones that use membership and partnership structures to help build the sector and address these types of commons issues that we outlined today. So some of the peer organizations we've been looking at include Rollback Malaria, Stop TB, ANDI, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, CGAP, and GSMA. And I think one of the big learnings, and one thing that you see reflected here, is that any sector building organization that wants to be successful, and any organization that wants to build the commons, really needs to find a way to be very inclusive and engage the community, and engage a broad set of stakeholders and experts. And I think within that, one of the operational learnings has been the value of these types of working group structures and providing a mechanism for individual partners and stakeholders to come together and work collectively towards shared objectives, and that the Alliance or any organization can play a significant role within the 4 buckets that we laid out here. So the convening, connecting, setting the agenda in partnership with members and stakeholders, building the knowledge base, and then helping to accelerate through some catalytic funding. So we've been really trying to capture the best practices, to capture those learnings, and think about how do you structure an effective organization that can move quickly, move towards some concrete objectives, but do so by really just leveraging the network and catalyzing others to work towards common objectives. So more on that, I think, at the summit itself, but that's some of the early learning that we've had to date.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Vicki.
Perfect. So the next question actually we'll read out loud for Donna Medeiros. So she's wondering if in the strategic planning process, we see that setting the agenda as well as policy setting together should be an upfront piece. And the question originated because policy was actually listed last on one of the slides. So she asked if we can please elaborate on where policy setting fits into the strategy. And one of the suggestions is that target country level stakeholders, such as the Ministry of Health directors, can be convened if they're not already planned to convene.
Great suggestion. And while policy is listed 5th on the slide, I think we recognize the interplay across these 5 gaps and the 5 strategic priorities outlined here. So it's less of a sequencing to tackle last, but more just delineating the individual areas. And just to say one more word on that, I think that when we think about the evidence piece, the financing piece, policy cuts across so many of these in ways that we recognize it won't need to be addressed early. And I think the working group structure that we laid out, with evidence and technology being the 2 examples, would be replicated across policy. And this would be a way in which we could address some of the gaps and questions and cross-cutting issues in tandem. Great.
And then our next question actually comes from Robert Estepian, and his question is, can the Alliance also look at how the evolution of new internet, telecoms, and network technologies integrate into the future of mHealth services? And related to that, how can the standards and future projects and deployment be aligned for such a process? Robert, I'll actually, if you're on the line, I'll actually open up the discussion to you to elaborate.
you don't seem to hear Robert. But why don't we address this question? And Robert, if there are any other additional ideas or thoughts that you'd like to share on how the Alliance can incorporate the technologies that you mentioned, that would be great. I think the message from our side is what we've seen is the sector is moving so quickly. The technology is moving quickly. mHealth as a field is moving quickly. And one of the big challenges is really staying up to date and making sure that the activities and are relevant. So I think we would really, again, work within these working groups and across this commons agenda to try to incorporate views of experts like yourself and determine where there are opportunities to really ensure that what's being planned and the strategy being executed is recognizing the many changes in the field and thinking of not just what exists today and where the gaps are and how to address them, but also how do we really take leadership and think ahead to what the field will look like in 2 to 3 years, 5 years, and make sure that we're ahead of that curve. So hopefully that answers your question, but if there were other things on your mind, please do either mention them now or you can follow up by email.